Hey everybody, so before we start today, I just wanted to say that since I've hit 100,000 subscribers, my next goal is 125. So if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so, it really helps. I have a love-hate relationship with Mortal Kombat. I love its world and lore, but the actual quality of writing sucks a fat one a lot of the time. I love how kinetic and visceral the gameplay usually is, but I also hate how long it takes for me to get back into a fighting game when I take a long break. I love that it's a series that doesn't conform to anybody's rules but its own, but I hate how inconsistent it can be in many ways. But even while I do take extended breaks, Mortal Kombat is another one of those franchises that I always find myself coming back to because there's an undeniable charm and campiness to it that inspires me to wade through my own personal shortcomings when it comes to fighting games to really enjoy the series for what it is. But the great thing about Mortal Kombat compared to other long-running franchises of its ilk, the lore is much more embedded into popular culture than you might expect. That's because Mortal Kombat, aside from being a long-running video game franchise in its own right, is one of the most prolific multimedia franchises that spawned from video games. You have movies, cartoons, merch, you name it. As such, the average person is more likely to be knowledgeable of the lore than, say, Tekken. And when it comes to the multimedia of it all, the movies are what I want to focus on today, particularly the live-action movies, of which there have been 3. There is a 4th one in development, but at time of writing, the movie isn't set to come out for over a year, and I don't feel like waiting. The question one might ask is, why am I talking about the live-action movies instead of the animated movies? Well, aside from the fact that I think the live-action movies are a bit more interesting to talk about based on various factors, I don't think I can get away with discussing the animated movies because the trademark gore is out in full swing in those movies. But I will say they are just as inconsistent as the rest of the series. As for these 3 movies, they came out in 1995, 1997, and 2021 respectively. They are each, say it with me now, inconsistent. None of these movies are perfect, far from it, but I think they each have a certain quality that makes them enjoyable watches, despite and indeed because of their flaws. With that said, they're all also very awful in their own ways, so let's stop beating around the bush and talk about these movies, starting with the 1995 classic, Mortal Kombat, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. Paul W.S. Anderson is most famous for directing the Resident Evil film series, so apparently he was just the video game adaptation guy before Uwe Boll brought the entire concept down to unforeseen depths. This movie is a somewhat faithful adaptation of the first game. In short, the cosmic rules state that once every generation, although it's usually 50 years, one of the cosmic realms can challenge another realm to a tournament pitting the best fighters of one realm against the best fighters of another realm. This is called Mortal Kombat. If one realm wins 10 straight Mortal Kombat tournaments, they earn the right to merge their realm with the realm they beat. And that's where we start in Mortal Kombat 1995.
Your brother's soul is mine.
As is always the case, whenever the first Mortal Kombat is adapted, Earthrealm has lost 9 straight tournaments to Outworld, a realm that at times is a chaotic world of magic and might that looks completely unlike anything on Earth, and at other times looks like the Middle East. So now it's time for the 10th and final tournament to decide Earthrealm's fate. A crew of the best fighters alive are assembled, in this case consisting of Johnny Cage, a jobbing actor played by Lyndon Ashby, Special Forces operative Sonya Blade played by Bridget Wilson in what could arguably be considered her breakout role, and a Shaolin monk who abandoned his faith, Liu Kang, played by Chinese-American actor Robin Shou, all led into battle by Christopher Lambert as the Thunder God Raiden. But in this tournament for the fate of the Earth, they have to contend with Outworld's forces, including notorious turncoat Kano, played by the late great Trevor Goddard, a janky animatronic Prince Goro of the Shokan tribe, and of course the final boss, Shang Tsung himself, played by the impeccable Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa.
Fatality.
The casting is mostly on point. Arguably the lone hiccup is probably Christopher Lambert as Raiden, but you've probably already heard that complaint a million times. It's worth reiterating though, it's strange to have a Japanese thunder god be played by a long-haired white guy, but it's their own adaptation so I don't consider it too big of a deal. I mean, they spelled Raiden with a Y anyway, so if it really bugs you that much, you can always just convince yourself that it's not the same guy. Besides, Christopher Lambert hams it the f*** up.
The fate of billions will depend upon you. Sorry.
So I don't mind. He's entertaining and he makes the role his own. It's like I said during my Percy Jackson Season 1 video. I'm okay with something that's visually inaccurate so long as they nail the personality and or make it work. That is, unless the race or appearance is vital to the characterization. I mean, hell, Johnny Cage is scrawnier than he probably should be, but they chose somebody who embodies the spirit of Johnny Cage better than anyone, probably. Johnny Cage is pretty much designated as the comic relief, and Lyndon Ashby does an excellent job.
You know, you gotta admire her. When she sets her mind on something...
It's not her mind you're admiring.
It's true.
But aside from him, I'd say all the actors pretty much nail their roles to a certain degree. Sonya Blade's no-nonsense attitude contrasts nicely against Johnny's Hollywood attitude. Kano is deliciously sinister, but the star of the show, I think everyone would agree, would be Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa as Shang Tsung.
Why else would I have chosen such a disreputable-looking creep? Look at him. No dignity.
He has such an on-screen presence and charisma that he essentially became the definitive version of Shang Tsung, to the point that they even brought him back in the Mortal Kombat 11 Aftermath expansion pack. I have many issues with that expansion pack, but Shang Tsung is not one of them. With that said, however, as is usually the case with most Mortal Kombat lore, Liu Kang is the main character of this particular flick as he's the destined chosen one. Which is a bit unfortunate because Robin Shou is probably the weakest actor of the main three, if only because you can tell that English isn't his first language and he was definitely cast for his martial arts skill more so compared to his acting, but he still has his moments, such as this iconic moment.
You carry the bags, or is that too complicated?
No. I got it.
Good.
While he is the main character, nobody of the main three characters feel left out. I mean, Johnny Cage is the person who ended up defeating Shang Tsung's star pupil, Goro. Plus, it helps that they're each taking part in Mortal Kombat for their own reasons. Liu Kang wants to avenge his brother for his death at the hands of Shang Tsung. Sonya Blade wants to take down the notorious underworld boss Kano for killing her partner, and he just so happens to be taking part in the tournament, and Johnny Cage wants to prove once and for all he's a legit martial artist and not just some actor, so is convinced to take part in the tournament when Shang Tsung disguises himself as Johnny's martial arts teacher and tells him to join the tournament. But you know what's funny about all that? Despite these three being the chosen ones to represent Earthrealm, Raiden makes no effort to recruit any one of them except for Liu, and as a matter of fact, Shang Tsung himself is the one who does most of the recruiting. He's the one who hires Kano and gets him to lure Sonya onto the boat driving to the island the tournament is taking place on. He's the one who disguises himself as Johnny Cage's master. He recruited the people who were going to end up defeating him. Which actually isn't a plot hole because he intended on ambushing them on his boat when they were making their way to the island before the tournament takes place. Then again, having the different warriors representing the different worlds attack each other before the tournament starts is apparently against the rules, which means Raiden's an idiot for not recruiting his own pupils, but Shang Tsung is an idiot for attempting to break the rules. I guess it helps that the movie never takes itself too seriously. Raiden is only one example of how campy this movie can be, and I find it absolutely great in that regard. Between the cheesy dialogue, acting, and even the plot progression. I mean, one of the opening scenes is Sonya Blade running through some sort of sex cult nightclub by the looks of it with a giant shotgun, which I'm pretty sure aren't standard issue for special force operatives, and she even fires off a shot and not a single person reacts. That's the level of reality we're dealing with. Even if you have a problem with that sort of tone, nothing ever overstays its welcome. They do a good job at explaining the characters and their motivations extremely quickly. Which I appreciate. It takes a lot of skill as a writer to succinctly establish everything you need to, and in this case it's done for the purpose of getting straight into the action that people expect. Which they achieve. Once they get to the island, you have a few short exposition scenes broken up by like a dozen fights. As a matter of fact, at one point there are 5 fights happening completely uninterrupted. There's so much happening back to back that one of the fights even leaves me a bit confused, specifically the Johnny Cage Scorpion fight. Because both Sonya and Liu's fights are well established as part of the tournament, but then there's just this weird showcase scene with Johnny Cage fighting Scorpion in a forest with nobody around. Was this a part of the tournament, or was Johnny Cage just going for a stroll and Scorpion decided to take his chances? In fairness, that's probably my favorite fight in the whole film outside of the final one, so I'll take it. The worst fight is probably Art Barr, some original character that was briefly established to have some sort of past history with Johnny taking on Goro. I mean, why should I care about an original character to begin with when the actual characters from the game are right there? Foreshadow, foreshadow. And it was funny watching Sonya freak out over his death. Oh no, not that guy I never met and has only been established to have any sort of relationship with Johnny Cage, though really both the fights with Goro kind of suck because the animatronic, while impressive, was probably difficult to manipulate in a way to create any compelling fight scenes. Though that reminds me, this is a tournament, right? What are the brackets? Because it seems like you have a few preliminary fights, then everybody goes through Goro. There's like an extended montage where everybody fights and then is defeated by Goro. However, once Goro is defeated, everybody advances to the final round. I would love to see the spreadsheet of the tournament brackets. It would probably look like vomit. The highlight of both of these Goro fights is an admittedly awesome moment where Johnny Cage uses the iconic nut punch on Goro. That is hilarious. Although talking about the lesser fights, it's fortunate that Sonya Blade was captured for a good chunk of the movie, so she only really has to fight in one real fight other than a showcase against nameless goons. Bridget Wilson was clearly the least athletic out of the main cast because when she fights, you can see her constantly stumbling over herself for realsies. It also doesn't help that she had the least amount of time to train out of everyone in the movie. She was a last-minute replacement for Cameron Diaz, who was apparently cast but broke her wrist right before filming started. Although personally, I think that Bridget Wilson was probably the better choice. I mean, I've seen Charlie's Angels, and I think Cameron Diaz is even less believable than her. What's funny is I didn't actually realize how many characters were originally supposed to be played by different actors until I started making this video. Hell, even this guy was supposed to be played by a cameoing Steven Spielberg. To be honest though, I actually did think that was Steven Spielberg at first. But I got off track. Other than the 3 fights I mentioned, the fight choreography is pretty damn good. You have a lot of impressively trained people pulling out absolutely ridiculous feats of athleticism that are simply fun to watch. They're also usually creative with their fights and include at least 2 or 3 unique set pieces per fight, keeping things fresh. As a wrestling fan, I enjoy whenever they decide to break out the odd wrestling maneuver, even if at times it is a touch unbelievable. Like, the fighting can be a bit too light in the sense that you can really tell they're not actually hitting each other. This goes for the sequel as well. You really have to suspend your disbelief with some of these scenes, especially the Johnny Cage Scorpion fight. As good as that fight is, you have a really incongruous amount of flippy shit that doesn't really add anything to the overall fight. I think I remarked at one point, there's more unnecessary flipping around than a Will Ospreay match. But by and large, the fight scenes are the best part of the movie, and they're all complemented by the settings. Everyone loves a good setting, especially for a fight scene. And the set design in this movie is pretty impeccable. On the island, you have so many visually striking areas that really invoke the Middle Ages, selling the idea that this tournament has been going on for thousands of years. So you have a big stone palace carved out of the mountains, big cavernous rooms lit up only by torches being held in what looks like the hands of carved gargoyle statues. If I was an evil sorcerer, this is the type of place I would live. And then once you get into Outworld, you have a more gothic horror-inspired look that sells the otherworldly nature of Outworld. And I really love the lighting in particular. I'm a simp for colored lighting, and the combination of that lighting and the set design creates some really striking shots. Super minor nitpick about those sets though. At one point, Liu Kang hits a rock while they're spying on Kano and Goro, and it clearly sounds like plastic.
I don't know.
But that's a nitpick. What definitely isn't a nitpick though are the non-practical VFX. This of course was in the mid-90s while CGI was still very new, but even by those standards, this movie has some absolutely woeful effects. I cannot stress how absolutely horrible some of them are, especially when you're viewing this movie in HD. Like, look at the whatever that is coming out of Scorpion's hand. Look at Reptile's base form. Look at this one shot when they're going up the steps of the palace. This goes so far down the uncanny valley it almost comes back up the other side. However, it can definitely get worse. Hello, Mortal Kombat Annihilation. Hold that thought. But regardless of the setting of these fights or the choreography, the fights all have one major elephant in the room, and that's the fact that Mortal Kombat is known for its blood and gore. It was groundbreaking in that sense, and yet this is a PG-13 movie that's almost entirely bloodless. It's a bit disappointing, but think about when this movie came out. This was 1995. The series was only 3 years old, and while Mortal Kombat may have been partially responsible for the creation of the ESRB, and as such wasn't suitable for kids, Kids were the only ones who were generally interested in it because the allure of the series was its juvenile, senseless violence. Couple that with the fact that gaming as a whole was very commonly considered something for kids back then, and you have a recipe for a franchise that, at the time, was only really enjoyed by 13-year-olds, despite the violence. There's nothing wrong with that, it's just how it was, but because gaming at the time was still flying somewhat under the radar, you could get away with having a successful M-rated game that was primarily aimed at 13-year-olds. Movies, on the other hand, were a lot more tightly regulated, and so to have this movie appeal to its target audience, you couldn't have it as anything more than a PG-13. Still, there are a lot of things you can get away with in a PG-13, and I think they made the most of it. Such as Scorpion bleeding magma and having his skull cut in half. That's pretty metal, but because it's not blood, it doesn't count. Speaking of Scorpion though, unfortunately because this is an ensemble movie, certain well-known characters have to become jobbers, and in that respect, both Scorpion and Sub-Zero are thrown under the bus. Both are high-ranking minions to Shang Tsung who go down after one major fight. Technically Sub-Zero has one fight before his major showcase, but that's a squash match at best. So jobbing out two of your most iconic characters in the first entry is maybe not the best idea, but of course, eventually you have to job out your main villain, and when the time comes for that, the Shang Tsung Liu Kang fight is nothing short of exceptional. It's a fight that brings a primal joy out of me that normally can only be brought out through hockey. It's just straight up fucking awesome. Though I have one minor criticism, so it's plainly established after Johnny Cage challenges Goro against the traditional tournament rules that Shang Tsung agreed to the exchange for the right to challenge anybody anywhere. And he chooses to fight Sonya to get a cheap win, but then we find out that she only has to fight him if she accepts the fight. So Shang Tsung agreed to the deal, but you still have to agree to the fight for him to get his end of the bargain. So what did Shang Tsung actually get out of the bargain? Seems a bit odd. Also, why is it that dozens of people can fight and get defeated by Goro, but then once Goro is defeated, only one person can fight Shang Tsung? Shouldn't everybody who made it past Goro be able to fight Shang Tsung? Why does the entire fate of the Earth rest on this one fight? But I'm just nitpicking at this point. Either way, it's a multi-part back and forth battle that ends with Shang Tsung impaled on some spikes. It's pretty glorious.
Flawless victory.
And that's the end. If you go into this movie expecting high art, you'll be disappointed. If you go into this movie expecting a bunch of fight scenes connected by a razor-thin if compelling plot with campy acting and an awesome finish, you'll be perfectly satisfied. I've heard the structure of this movie is pretty much identical to Enter the Dragon, but I've never seen that movie, so I wouldn't know. I think of the 3 live-action Mortal Kombat movies, this one holds up the best as a structured movie. It's more or less solid all the way through, but doesn't attempt to be anything more than what it is. And you could say that's either a flaw or a virtue, but once we're through this, then we have to contend with Mortal Kombat Annihilation. You see, at the end of Mortal Kombat 95, Liu Kang and his crew return to the Shaolin Temple to celebrate, only for Outworld to invade, despite losing the tournament. And they all pose for the camera, setting up the sequel. Unfortunately, the sequel would end up being one of the worst movies ever made. Simultaneously, though, it's also one of the most stupidly enjoyable movies of all time. While Paul W.S. Anderson directed the first movie, he stepped out in favor of John R. Leonetti in his directorial debut, as it turns out. I don't know why, but I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. I will admit to having a bit of a personal fondness for MKA, not due to nostalgia per se, but more so for a stupid memory. You see, back in 2021, I was traveling for the first time, and while I was meant to go to New York, a major delay meant that I was stuck in Chicago overnight, and unlike when I was stuck in Montreal, they actually gave me a complimentary hotel room. So I ordered a couple of beers from the hotel bar downstairs and just lounged in my surprisingly upscale room and decided to watch something on my travel laptop. For some reason I landed on Mortal Kombat Annihilation, and after a few beers I feel like I was in the perfect mental mindset to view the movie. Because I'm not lying when I say this is essentially the Room of video game movies. Filled with bad acting, bad effects, cheesy dialogue, nonsensical plot progression, and everything else that could possibly be bad about a movie. But if you're willing to turn your brain off and watch this movie for the absolute cinematic disaster that it is, it's honestly one of the more enjoyable movies you'll see. Apparently, one of the taglines for this movie was, "Destroy all expectations." And boy, they weren't kidding. The first thing you'll notice when you turn this movie on is that most of the cast has been replaced. This is especially noticeable if you watch the two movies back to back. To say it sticks out like a sore thumb would be horribly underselling it. Christopher Lambert, Bridget Wilson, and Lyndon Ashby have been replaced by James Remar, Sandra Hess, and Chris Conrad respectively. The only two of the main cast who remain are Robin Shou as Liu Kang, who looks noticeably smaller, and Talissa Soto as Katana. Yeah, I didn't really mention Katana when talking about the previous film because she kind of ended up being a non-factor. She allies herself with Liu Kang because Shao Kahn conquered her world much in the same way that he was trying to conquer Earthrealm, but other than telling him to defeat Sub-Zero by using the element that brings life, which ends up being a bucket of water, she doesn't really play much of a factor.
Use the element which brings life.
What?
Incidentally, the whole thing about the element that brings a life, I don't think that's water. Water maintains a life. The element that brings a life is spunk. But anyways, she's a lot more central to this story, and as such shows up for much more of the movie. And oh god, she wasn't exactly an A-list actress in the previous movie, but in Annihilation, she's straight up awful.
It's a trap, Lou. Leave.
I'm not even kidding when I say she both looked like and had the acting chops of Gal Gadot 20 years before Gal Gadot broke into the industry. I wonder if she was an inspiration. Either way, she's responsible for a few legendarily bad line reads, but if you were to take a shot for every bad line read in this movie, you'd probably be dead before the 10-minute mark.
Mother. You're alive.
Too bad you will die.
As long as the portal remains open, your world becomes my world.
What closes can also open again.
What is that supposed to mean?
It's embarrassing. I'm not sure who to blame here. Do you blame the actors, the director? Is it some sort of weird circumstance with a lot of behind-the-scenes drama that led to a lot of bad acting that was independent of the main production? I don't know. All I know is this is what we're left with. So the plot is sort of an adaptation of Mortal Kombat 3. For reasons that weren't really explained in the movie but were explained in Mortal Kombat 3, Shao Kahn has revived Sindel, who was the Queen of Edenia, the realm that Katana was the princess of, that was conquered by Shao Kahn. Meaning that Sindel is Katana's mother, played by Musetta Vander? Is that how that's pronounced? An actress who actually looks younger than the person she's allegedly the mother of. She also looks like a cross between Sherry Moon Zombie and Aaron Hansen's wife Susie. And ostensibly, her revival has allowed for the portals between Earthrealm and Outworld to stay open, and as such, it has allowed Earthrealm and Outworld to begin merging, a process that will take 6 days. At which point Shao Kahn will become the supreme ruler of the merged world. Shao Kahn also kills Johnny Cage in a rather matter-of-fact way. In the first of this movie's many dumb decisions, so the remaining Earthrealm fighters must rally in order to gain enough power to defeat Shao Kahn. Using these weird spheres to travel long distances, Liu Kang must find the warrior Nightwolf to unlock his animality, which is the key to defeating Shao Kahn. Sonya must find her partner Jax, played by Lynn Williams, also a recast from the last movie, but Jax was barely in the movie, so who cares, because Lynn is genuinely a highlight of the movie if you ask me.
Shao Kahn will be pleased.
Shao, what? I'll take homeboy.
And Raiden must seek out the Temple of the Elder Gods to try and figure out why Shao Kahn was allowed to invade Earthrealm despite losing the tournament. He also willingly gives up his immortality so he can fight alongside the Earthrealmers. Yeah, even at this point, even though Earthrealm is literally being illegally merged with Outworld, Raiden is the only one with restrictions on who he can fight, because the Elder Gods hate Earthrealm. Also, him turning mortal doesn't really mean anything. I mean, he briefly dies at the hands of Shao Kahn, but he's brought back like it's nothing. But then again, everything happens like it's nothing. This is the type of movie that throws so much at you so quickly that it's easy to lose track. First of all, there are so many characters that show up and disappear just as quickly, it gives me whiplash. Both Cyber Smoke and Cyrax show up, then die after pretty quick action scenes. Kuai Liang, appearing as the successor to the original Sub-Zero Bihan, shows up and disappears in the same scene. It's also the scene where Scorpion comes back to life without explanation, shows up to have a fan-servicey fight with Sub-Zero, then kidnap Katana. I don't have a problem with him coming back to life because, you know, that's his thing, but he just disappears from the movie after this scene. Cabal and Stryker are apparently captured off screen by Rain, but this apparently isn't good enough for Shao Kahn, who then kills Rain for reasons I still don't quite understand. A butt-ugly Baraka and a few nameless Tarkatans show up and die in the same scene. Incidentally, they literally reuse the footage of Shao Kahn throwing Rain into the pit of fire. That's hilarious. Melina shows up to ambush Sonya Blade at one point, and I literally forgot about this scene by the end of the movie. I have a theory that this scene was only put in to have a few women mud wrestle. Nightwolf, whose depiction is surprisingly excellent, shows up for literally one scene, knocks Liu Kang out, and then never shows up again. Shiva at least has a few scenes, including a brief scuffle with Motaro, but then she dies in the most anticlimactic way possible, to the point that it's almost comical. I heard that one was due to budgetary reasons and complications with implementing the 4 arms, so whatever. Oh, and did you even know that Noob Saibot was in this movie? Because I forgot until I started doing research for this video. This movie is a constant barrage of incongruous cameos. As much of an ensemble cast the first movie was, it kept it relatively small. 3 main heroes, 3 main villains, a mentor, and 3 enemy henchmen. And even with that cast, the characterization suffered a bit. This, on the other hand, feels like they have so many characters to include that they're firing them out of a cannon for the amount of screen time they get. Then the actual plot structuring is absolutely nonsensical most of the time. Like, okay, Shao Kahn wants to become the ruler of all realms, and so he conspires with his own father, Shinnok, the Elder God, to keep the portals between the worlds open illegally. I think that's the legitimate reason, and Sindel is supposed to be the red herring. Shinnok is also established as Raiden's dad, which ends up meaning dick all. But what does Shinnok stand to gain from all this? What is his motive? He puts his ass on the line constantly, and all for what? Considering he has something happen to him when his treachery is discovered. Also, at one point Shinnok gets pissy at Shao Kahn for not being able to stop Raiden, to which Shao Kahn says that Raiden couldn't be stopped. But then in the first scene when they confronted each other, Raiden offers to give himself up in exchange for Johnny Cage, and Shao Kahn just decides to kill Johnny Cage instead. Is he stupid?
I think he's f***ing dumb!
Oh, and then it's said that to discover his animality, Liu Kang must pass 3 trials. The first is a trial of self-esteem, courage, and focus, which comes in the form of a dream sequence, and then the second test is a test of temptation where he has to resist the advances of Jade. Incidentally, goddamn. But then not only is the third trial never revealed, but it's later revealed that Jade is actually a mole for Shao Kahn. Like, what? I thought this was supposed to be a dream sequence or something, but not only is she real, but this person who was part of a test set up by Nightwolf is somehow evil? Did Shao Kahn somehow know that Liu Kang was gonna go on a spirit journey and made sure to recruit Jade beforehand? Is Nightwolf evil and set Liu Kang up? I can't make heads or tails of any of this. The one plotline that I think is decently set up is the fact that when Raiden seeks the counsel of the Elder Gods, Shinnok sets him on a wild goose chase to try and capture Sindel with the understanding that reuniting her with Kitana would close the portals, only for that to be completely false. Obviously, Shao Kahn and Shinnok are trying to waste their time because they only have 6 days. And despite the passage of time in this movie being so inconsistent as to basically be meaningless, this at least brings them to the edge of that time limit. But then for some reason, Shao Kahn is so upset with Jade's performance that he kills her as well. I don't even know what she did wrong. But that goes for half the villain cast, and now I have to discuss the portrayal of Shao Kahn by Brian Thompson.
You can die in duty or by my hand. The choice is yours.
Let me be clear, I think that Brian Thompson has a perfect voice and perfect face for being a villain. He's just naturally imposing, but he's also not very big. He's decently built, but Shao Kahn is supposed to be this otherworldly, godlike being who towers above everyone he faces. This is the guy they have playing Shao Kahn in the new movies. You see what I'm saying? Brian's perfect for like a Hans Gruber-style mob boss villain, something more grounded. He's so antithetical to what Shao Kahn is, it's easy to forget that's who he's supposed to be. Most of the time he doesn't even wear his mask. Not that it matters, it looks like something you'd buy at a Spirit Halloween. I mean, that's only one example of how cheap this movie looks. The set design is mostly okay, if a bit uninspired, but most of the costume design is pretty bad, with cheap looking costumes and a bunch of robots that look obviously plastic. But then the special effects in this movie, oh my god. They make the special effects in the previous movie look like the special effects from Avatar. I can make a montage of all the terrible effects, but I'd be pretty much showing the entire movie. And as a matter of fact, between the terrible acting, all the recasts, and the horrible cheap look of this movie, I remember hearing at one point this movie has the makings of a porn parody just without the sex. And you know what? It's hard to disagree. Though I think I have a better comparison. But this requires a bit of an embarrassing story. So growing up, my mother was a big fan of the show Charmed. Actually, she's still a big fan to this day. I was exposed to a lot of that show, and as a matter of fact, Brian Thompson was the main villain in one of these episodes. Specifically, the season 5 finale where he played Kronos. Yes, as in the Kronos from Greek mythology. And I was thinking about how the special effects in this movie look below the bar for Hollywood in the 90s, making it on the level of a TV show or possibly a TV movie at best. Those two thoughts intersected and I realized, oh my god, this movie looks like an episode of Charmed. Quite frankly, I don't know what's the more damning comparison. Looking like a porn parody or looking like an episode of Charmed? Is there anything redeeming about this movie? Well, there are a lot more references to the games, such as Katana having her fan blades, or Sonya Blade blowing some explosive powder into Cyrax in a way that references her Mortal Kombat 1 fatality, and the fight choreography is okay. Not on the level of the previous movie, but it's still pretty fun and you get a lot of it. Although I don't know what the hell they were doing here. Aren't you supposed to be trying to hit your opponent? Oh, and get this. During this fight, Sindel is defeated and captured off-screen by Jade. Granted, it was a setup by her and Jade, so you can make the argument that the fact that it happens off-screen is meant to illustrate how suspiciously inconsequential the fight was, so it's clear that it was a setup, although it could have been budgetary reasons. I don't know. The fights between Katana and Sindel, as well as Sonya and, covertly Googles which person she fought because I forgot, Ermac, are good for what they are. Though you have to sit through their attempts to make a fight between Jax and Motaro believable. But I will say, this is catharsis by proxy, considering that when I was really young playing Mortal Kombat 3 on my family PC, Motaro was a roadblock I could never get past. Not even once. And I'm sure that applies to most people. The best fight is probably in the grand finale between Liu Kang and Shao Kahn. Well, once it properly gets going, it's pretty good. During this, you get an atrocious and almost indecipherable fight between Liu Kang and Shao Kahn's animalities. It's genuinely one of the worst things I've ever seen. Then the other Elder Gods show up and decide that despite Shao Kahn's invasion of Earthrealm being illegal, they're going to give him one last chance to complete his invasion and merger through
Mortal Kombat.
Okay, that's all I'm gonna show of that song because as good as it is, it'll also content ID me. And we finally get the final fight, which is a pretty fun fight despite ending with a pretty basic backflip kick. And with that, Earth is saved, and look at that stock footage. With that, the movie is over. Shinnok and Shao Kahn are defeated, and Mortal Kombat's reputation is so tarnished that it would take over a decade for it to recover. This movie is awful. It's pretty much awful in every possible way that a movie can be awful, but man, it is so much fun. I couldn't stop cracking up. It's a cinematic car crash. Terrible plot structuring, terrible acting, terrible special effects, terrible dialogue, and a horribly bloated roster of characters that had no time to develop. If you gather some friends together, grab a case of beer, and just don't take this movie too seriously, this is one of the best bad movies you can watch. But I wasn't speaking idly when I said that Mortal Kombat really died a death around this time. Between this movie, terrible games like Mortal Kombat Mythologies Sub-Zero as well as Special Forces, and general media overexposure, it rapidly declined in popularity, which is one of the reasons it took over 20 years for another movie to be made. This would end up being Mortal Kombat 2021, directed and produced by Simon McCoy. But I think the 20-year time gap was kind of the best thing for this movie because when the series was new and really only appealed to teenagers, you were more or less forced to make non-bloody movies like I said earlier, but by 2021, the series was just under 30 years old. Which meant that aside from gaming becoming a much more accepted hobby for adults, most of the people who grew up with this series were now deep into adulthood. Meaning that an R-rated Mortal Kombat movie was not only viable, it was expected. And I know I've already used this line, but screw it, I like it. Much like Hulk Hogan in the bedroom, this movie is a hard R. It is vulgar, it is brutal, and it is glorious. However, I will have to censor some of the gore, because while Mortal Kombat 2021 is a hard R, my channel is a PG-13. I heard that one of the conditions for making this movie was that Simon McCoy wanted every cast member to be ethnically accurate, which I think is really cool. Mortal Kombat has a really diverse and interesting roster of characters, and I would like to see them have proper justice done in that regard. I mean, like I said, I was okay with Christopher Lambert playing Raiden because he made it his own, but for characters whose ethnicity is an important aspect of their characterization, I appreciate the effort they put into accurately representing the culture. So the plot of Mortal Kombat 2021 starts at the usual starting point. Earthrealm is one loss away from being absorbed into Outworld, but due to a prophecy I'll talk about in a bit, Shang Tsung and Shao Kahn believe that Earthrealm might actually pull out the victory. So Shang Tsung has his minions hunt down and kill the Earthrealm forces before the tournament starts, sabotaging it and therefore leaving the door open for Outworld to steamroll through Earthrealm. And what this means is, there's no actual Mortal Kombat tournament in this movie called Mortal Kombat. This is the movie that sets events in motion that leads us to the tournament. It's the first thing that I and many people learned about the movie, and it's a bit dumb, but so long as the story getting there is compelling, I'm willing to roll with them on this one. The movie starts as it means to go on, brutally. They show the origin story of Hanzo Hasashi, aka Scorpion. In 17th century Japan, he's living a relatively peaceful life with his wife and 2 children until a rival clan, the Lin Kuei, led by Bi-Han, aka Sub-Zero, attack. This is a gloriously brutal scene that showcases what we're in for, with excellently visceral fight choreography and multiple brutally bloody deaths, including one particular moment where a guy gets stabbed straight through the top of his skull. Meanwhile, Bi-Han freezes Hanzo's wife and child to death, and the resulting fight is one of the best in the movie, with Hanzo using his kunai, but he's no match for Sub-Zero and his raw power, and he tragically dies at his own doorstep. Meanwhile, Raiden shows up after all the fighting because being fashionably late is kind of his thing, but he finds the one surviving member of the Hasashi clan, a newborn baby hidden under the floorboards, and with that, he takes in this child so that the Hasashi clan can live to the modern day. And so Scorpion's modern day counterpart is Cole Young, played by Louis Tan. Now, people familiar with Mortal Kombat would know that Cole Young is not a character from the series. He's a completely original character, and it just makes me laugh that despite how vast the cast of Mortal Kombat is, they chose a blank slate original character who is genuinely one of the most milquetoast, boring characters you could possibly have. And this is no knock on Louis Tan. He's a great actor and an even better martial artist, but he's just given nothing to work with here.
They tried to kill my family. Help us.
There's nothing for you here. Only death.
Well, I'm willing to die for my family.
Oh yeah, he has a wife and child to complete the generic motivation bingo card. He's reactionary to a fault. He's a guy who gets dragged along through this world with no agency and without any intention of displaying any character traits. I think the lone blip on the radar in that regard is when he takes a bite out of his daughter's ice cream. I understand that having a blank slate of a character is somewhat important in movies like this because you need one character who's an outsider so that characters who have more knowledge can explain what's going on. But you can have an outsider character that still has a degree of personality. Johnny Cage in the 1995 movie handled this quite well. And the sad thing is, his entire character reeks of unearned importance in the worst way possible. You see, it was established that there's a prophecy of a warrior of the Hasashi bloodline who would unite a group of the fiercest warriors in the world, and he would lead them to victory. So he's given a plotline of essentially being born great and being a predestined hero. But because of how it's presented, fate just drags him along for the ride whether he likes it or not. I'm generally not a fan of chosen one plotlines because it's hard to make someone who's a predestined hero be compelling compared to somebody who rises from humble origins. But it's possible to make it work. Mortal Kombat 1995 did this. They gave you 3 possible quote-unquote chosen ones. They each have actual personality. While Liu Kang is established as the descendant of the great Kung Lao, they're each chosen for their skill more so than for anything predestined, and finally, they each have agency over their choices. They all choose to join the tournament. Johnny chooses to face Goro ahead of schedule. They choose to go to Outworld. Liu Kang chooses to fight Shang Tsung for the fate of the Earth. It's not amazing or anything, but it gets it right. Plus, they each also have to overcome major personality shortfalls before they're able to have the potential to save the world. I guess in theory, Cole does sort of have a story by having to overcome his own incompetence to succeed, because Cole is established as a bit of a loser. He's a jobbing cage fighter for a start, getting brutalized for almost no money, and the first we see of him, he's getting absolutely rocked. In fact, getting rocked is kind of his whole thing. Pretty much every major fight scene until he unlocks his powers is him getting brutalized, but then his powers, once he gets them, allows him to get absolutely brutalized and still keep going. He has literal plot armor. But I guess with that, I have to explain the concept of the Arcana. The Arcana is sort of their attempt to try and explain why certain characters in the Mortal Kombat universe are ostensibly human but have magic powers. It doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. Basically, once you find yourself with the Mark of the Dragon, you're able to bring out your Arcana through whatever defines you as a human being. Kano brings out his Arcana through his anger, for example, while Cole brings out his Arcana through protecting his family. It's not necessarily a bad idea, but it's really underdeveloped, because for several characters, the Arcana is never fully established. Sonya Blade seems to activate her Arcana the moment she kills Kano to get the mark. Because yes, you can actually kill people who have the Mark of the Dragon to take their mark. Which kinda puts a hole in the Chosen Warrior narrative, but whoop-de-doo. The same thing happened to Liu Kang. He said that he killed a human trafficker who happened to have the mark, and that's how he got his mark, but also when he killed the human trafficker, that also activated his Arcana. I'm not sure what they were going for there. What exactly was it that gave Liu Kang his fireballs? What is it that defines him as a person? The implication is that his Arcana has something to do with protecting orphans because he was an orphan himself, but that's a very tough thing to quantify. It's a decent idea in theory, but in execution it leads to more questions than it answers. Like, what happens if the thing that defines you as a person is something vague and non-specific? Like, for example, I've been told that my most negative attribute is the fact that I have a tendency of holding on to grudges for too long. If that was my Arcana, then how would that work? It just doesn't really make much sense. Also, this whole Arcana thing leads to the single dumbest scene in the entire movie. So early in the movie, Jax loses his arms in a fight with Sub-Zero because losing his arms is Jax's lot in life. It's almost comical at this point. You can practically make a betting game out of how Jax is gonna lose his arms every time they make a new Mortal Kombat continuity. But anyways, he gets tiny robot replacement arms, built by the monks of Raiden's temple. What? But then later, he and Sonya are trapped at the bottom of a cliff, completely helpless, and only then does Jax's Arcana activate, which makes his tiny robot arms into big, powerful robot arms. Like, what? I'm sorry, was that always destined to be his Arcana, or did the Elder Gods just decide to take pity on him after losing his arms? Honestly, if he didn't have any arms at all after losing his until this moment, it would have been a lot more acceptable. But the fact that they built him tiny arms and then those arms became big arms, it seems almost comically stupid to me. Which is a shame because I think Jax, played by Mechad Brooks, is actually one of the best characters in this movie. He has among some of the most screen time and plot relevance. First of all, being the one that recruits Cole and rescues him when Sub-Zero attacks.
Means you've been chosen.
Chosen? For what?
To fight.
You got the wrong person, all right? I'm not the fighter that I used to be, okay?
No shit.
Unfortunately, though, I don't think any one character really reaches their fullest potential. It's another ensemble movie. It's more bloated than the 1995 movie, but less bloated than Annihilation. You have Cole, obviously, but you also have Sonya, Jax, Raiden, Kung Lao, Liu Kang, and also Kano until he defects, as he inevitably does. You also have Scorpion, which I guess is a spoiler, but not really, considering Hanzo Hasashi dying and coming back is kind of his thing. Personally, I would love to see Scorpion fight Kratos in the battle of people who refuse to stay dead. And then on the other side, let's see if I can remember all of them off the top of my head, you have Shang Tsung, Mileena, Raiko, Kabal, Natara, Goro, obviously, Sub-Zero, obviously. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone. Right, there was an invisible lizard creature, which I think was supposed to be Reptile. Well anyways, seeing as the cast of characters in the Mortal Kombat universe has only ballooned since the 90s, it makes sense that they want to have a big cast, so that by movie 3 they might be able to include all the heavy hitters, but inevitably this does mean that certain characters once again get thrown under the bus. Even the characters who don't die feel somewhat underutilized. Shang Tsung, for example, though going from Kari Hiroyuki Dagawa to Chin Han, well I mean, this was never going to be anything but a downgrade. He's not terrible, but he doesn't have enough time to establish himself as anything other than a bit of a bland mwahaha.
Winning Mortal Kombat cannot be left to chance. There will be no tournament because there'll be no opposition left to fight.
And he doesn't have the charisma to pull off the somewhat standard dialogue. Plus, he also looks like a member of Dead or Alive, which I think is funny. I don't remember Raiden doing anything other than show up late and get mad at Cole for not succeeding to an unreasonable degree. Then there are the characters who straight up die without getting more than like 10 lines. like Natara and Raiko. Yo, is that Nathan Jones? Like The Undertaker's old tag team partner Nathan Jones? The hell? But anyways, they both seem like they're really in the movie just to increase the body count while still being obscure enough characters as to not piss too many people off for killing them. Then Melina is one of the most important characters in canon, but she only has like 3 speaking lines. But the one that pisses me off is watching Kung Lao get soul sucked. Like, I know that Kung Lao at this point is just specifically there to die so Liu Kang can avenge him, but my god, this dude had some of the best moments in the movie and they just killed him like that. So it is a big shame that so much time gets spent on a really boring character that potentially interesting characters don't have that much time to shine. With one exception. Kano. I speak no hyperbole when I say I'm surprised Josh Lawson didn't herniate a disc carrying this movie.
Fate has better standards than you.
Lucky for you, I don't have any standards. Let's see if you're a natural blonde.
Descendant of the great Kung Lao, the grand champion of the Order of Light.
Never heard of him.
Make yourself at home.
Yeah, I have. Oh, by the way, your beer's shit and you're almost out of it.
He is so great. I'm not sure if he's stereotypically Australian or just authentically Australian, but he's crass, he's vulgar, and he is hilarious. Every line without fail is pure gold, expertly delivered, to the point that I quote Kano almost daily.
But the training area is for the chosen ones only.
Fucking whoops.
I had never heard of this guy before the movie came out, but I know that he's a comedic actor in Australia, and so I have a gut feeling that most of his dialogue was improvised. It feels far too authentic to have been written for him. Like, okay, that moment where Liu Kang is spamming the leg sweep in reference to when Liu Kang would do the same thing in the games, that feels like it was deliberately written, but there are a bunch of moments where it seems like everyone else is speaking pre-written dialogue while Josh Lawson is just riffing.
There's much to learn. The fuck? But not here.
I've heard criticism in the past that he's too heavily comedic, he's not serious enough, so it's inauthentic to the games. Personally, I don't care. It's just about entertainment at the end of the day, and I can't say enough good things about his portrayal. Of course, I was disappointed to see him killed off as part of the hunting down the bad guys montage, but I don't think he's gone. I mean, this is Mortal Kombat we're talking about. Death doesn't really mean much at this point. So I expect to see him back in the sequel, probably with half his face properly cyber-enhanced. I mean, I don't see Raiko or Natara coming back. I feel like they were pure fodder, but as for the other characters, Bi-Han gets burnt to a crisp to the point that his outfit turns black, so he's definitely coming back as Noob Saibot. I know a lot of people got mad that Melina gets killed off, but lest we forget, Melina is a clone of Princess Katana mixed with Tarkatan DNA. If they can clone her once, they can clone her again. And while I don't exactly know how they're going to do it, I can't see a Mortal Kombat continuity having an adaptation of the first game without also including Goro as the secondary final boss. As for Kung Lao, I see him coming back as a Revenant like he does in the games. The only major character I'm not sure is coming back is Cabal. He doesn't really have an out, and also isn't a top tier iconic character. He's probably a tier below that, but he's still a major character. So it seems like they could go either way with him. So I'm not mad that the majority of these characters got killed off, because you're a fool if you think they're staying dead. I'm more so just mad that a lot of them got killed off in really unceremonious ways. Most of them got killed off during a montage of short fight scenes, which is a shame because the fight scenes in this movie are excellent when they're allowed to breathe. The fight choreography is actually more believable than the old movies, like through the sound design and the believable choreography, you really feel the impact. Particularly with Max Huang as Kung Lao, who was apparently so athletic and so quick that he was actually told to slow down in order for audiences to be able to digest his fight scenes. Also, what I like about the fight scenes in this movie compared to the other movies especially is that not every fight scene is a gymnastics routine. You have a few of those, but you also have a fair share of knockdown, drag-out brawls where they're just trying to beat their opponents into submission through overwhelming strength. Like with the reptile fight, where they somehow made a fight with an invisible lizard look believable. Then of course there's the brutal fights, where choreography and strength take a backseat to the spectacle of watching people stab each other. They definitely earn their rating, and the highlight for me is about midway through the movie when Cabal convinces Kano to defect and destroy the idol, which is creating a protective force field around Raiden's temple that prevents Shang Tsung and his minions from attacking. Everyone pairs off to fight their specific person, and Kung Lao is paired with Natara. If you know anything about Kung Lao, you know that his hat doubles as a saw blade, so when he's riding on Natara's back, he throws down his hat into the ground and then grabs her wings so she can't control her own flight, so she rams into the ground, sliding right into the hat and saws her fucking face in half.
Flawless victory.
Oh! Sorry. And what's great about this is the special effects are top notch. Not everything in this movie is visually convincing, especially with the fully CGI characters, but generally speaking, the CGI is pretty good. Most of it clearly went into the gore effects, but even the little things like Raiden's electricity or Liu Kang holding a fireball looks believable, which is really surprising given the budget of this movie. But if every dollar of the special effects budget went into this one moment, it would still be worth it. There are very few times where I've watched a movie that has a moment so badass that it actually fills me with primal joy to this extent. And this movie has several of these moments, especially in the final fight, which is the fight where all the best aspects of these fights come together. Choreography, brute strength, and pure brutality. This is the point where all other major villains are defeated except for Sub-Zero, so Sub-Zero kidnaps Cole's family and throws them to near death at Cole's old MMA gym, and demands a one-on-one fight. And while the initial phase of this fight is pretty good, after a certain point, for reasons that aren't quite clear, Cole through his own bloodline awakens Scorpion, and we get a rematch 400 years in the making. And my god, it is fucking awesome.
Get over here!
It's pure fan servicey goodness. Well, except for the fact that Cole is trying to break his family out of the ice, so between the beautifully choreographed, beautifully shot, beautifully edited action, we have to cut back to Cole comically punching the ice off his wife and daughter. It's really stupid, but you know what? I don't care. The fight between Sub-Zero and Scorpion with Cole occasionally jumping back in is so awesome, it doesn't matter. And you know what? That's the bottom line for this movie. I can complain about the story that feels like it's all set up and no payoff. I can complain about the boring main character. I can complain about Raiden being useless. I can complain about the Arcana thing making no sense. But I can't bring myself to care about any of that because at the end of the day, this movie has so much pure, unfiltered badass energy that I can't bring myself to hate it. I don't use the term primal joy idly. Sure, this is a movie that's mostly for your id to enjoy and not much else, but you know what? Sometimes that's enough. It's not a perfect movie, not by a long shot, but I'll be damned if Mortal Kombat 2021 isn't one of the more enjoyable popcorn movies I've watched. And it basically ends with them setting up the tournament in the next movie, which is, let's be honest, the real plot. And they also tease Johnny Cage for next time. If there's one thing I want out of the next Mortal Kombat movie, it would be this. First scene. Have Bi-Han come back as Noob Saibot and kill Cole Young. First of all, that would mean Scorpion would be able to come back and exact further revenge on Bi-Han for killing his family again. Then second of all, it would leave the main character slot open for someone like, I don't know, Liu Kang or God forbid Johnny Cage. Then third of all, it would raise the stakes. The guy who killed Goro gets killed by Noob Saibot. I mean, yeah, don't kill him off like they killed off Johnny Cage in Annihilation. Like, yeah, give him a fair fight, but have him eventually succumb to Noob Saibot. It's not like they'd be killing off the Hasashi bloodline because Cole's kid is still alive. I feel like the next movie has the potential to be the perfect Mortal Kombat movie, but it can't be while the original character is still running around. Then again, I feel like each of these movies kind of have individual elements that when combined could very well make the perfect Mortal Kombat movie. The 1995 movie has the best structure and characters, even if it is a bit predictably plotted and doesn't quite have the uniquely violent elements that Mortal Kombat needs. Annihilation is an awful movie, but it's just plain fun, and Mortal Kombat 2021 is a bit messy and has a main character problem, but easily has the best fight scenes out of any of these movies. And also Kano. And I feel like if you were to combine these elements, you'd get a perfect movie for Mortal Kombat. But all these movies also suffer from their own flaws, some more than others, and I'm hoping that eventually when Mortal Kombat 2 comes out in 2025, they can take all the positive elements from these movies and omit the negatives. Will it happen? Probably not. But I'll probably still enjoy it despite all its flaws. But that's all I've got to say, so if you like this video and want to support the channel, you can like this video, leave a comment telling me what you think, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. Normally I do a Patreon shout out at the end of this, but to those of you still watching, I am formally announcing that I'm suspending the Patreon at the end of the month until further notice. But either way, big thank you to Dick Kickham, Gaw004, FarmCat84, Raph, Ranger X, and Weird Webster for going above and beyond. And elsewise than that, I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.